joined by Simon and Euan from Dornoch. Guys, what happened when you opened that book?
Well, I got concerned because there's state secrets which are revealed in that book. So you have to look pretty closely at things which people may have overlooked, but there's a few hard-won secrets hidden in there from old-style production, and you're like, oh right, well. Still, I don't think anyone else is stupid enough to do what we do. And it's like, oh, other people are stupid enough to do what we do. So yeah, but I want to see what other people do with it. You know, we've been great proponents of old style whiskey to the point where we've really put our money where our mouths are on it. And yeah, I want to see other people's take on that. What they can do with this kind of information, with the willingness to take those hits on the yield, take those hits on time, and see how they think that compares to their current spirit. And maybe, you know, this is too extreme for most people to commit to the economics of it, because, you know, if we made Dornoch on the scale that some of our friends here have got, we'd go bankrupt. But it's small enough that we can make it work. But yeah, if you were to do this style of whiskey every day, that would be financially challenging for anyone at scale. So, but to see them have a little plaything, I'm super excited. I haven't tasted anyone else's yet. We're going to do that next. So, so yeah, you can speed through this as quickly as you want, because I want to taste that.
Let's get to the drum.
So reading through that, I mean, it wasn't a huge jump. I mean, you know, for a lot of people, you know, oh my God, yeah, I never knew that happened in the 1820s. But actually, having gone around Dornoch, pretty much what was in there is what you're applying.
Yeah,
already.
The core principles were always there. You and Phil would come up through your own research and your own path with that, and based on that, for me personally, it reinforced a lot of the kind of theories that
we're not crazy.
That we're not. Yeah, it reinforced that you're not totally mad, that there was some basis to it, and kind of gives you the bit of the leg up and informs some of the decisions we've made. We've actually made some change. We're now taking a couple of things from what we tried in this going forward. We, like Simon was saying, we're able to do that because of the small scale. You know, we can make it work on our scale, but it was sort of just, it did reinforce a lot of the ideas and the principles and showed us that there is, you know, method in the madness that we've been pursuing for 7 years.
Yeah, and maybe before we jump into exactly what you did here, why did you take the approach that you've always taken? You know, what was the thinking behind the setup of Dornoch?
Yeah, so with regards to the book, we're mostly in the ballpark of this, and Leon approached us a bit with the idea of the project, and we're like, well, if other people are going to come and play in our play field, then we'd better be there to yeah, because we don't do any casks out to independent bottlers, etc. But so this is like the one exception for this project, because we had to take part. But yeah, what we do is all very much based on reverse engineering older styles of whiskey, which, as we quickly found out isn't quite as straightforward as old barley variety plus old brewing yeast variety plus longer fermentation equals old style whiskey. A lot more to it than that. Some of that crops up in the book here, which is unfortunate, because I'd rather other people didn't know about some of those. But then some of it's not obvious in the book, but the information's there if you know what they're getting at. And what really, because I remember when with the previous James Eadie book, when that came out, I, rambling away at poor Leon, we're talking about some old style production stuff and some things we were trying, and this was based on my theory. I hadn't found it written down any, but I was kind of putting together these sort of logical pathways of how things would have happened and what its effects were. And I was explaining that some of these flavors that came from that pathway were just as a result of how things had to be at the time, but the processes wouldn't have been understood at the time. That was my arrogant thinking. Yes, it was understood at the time because it's explained in here, and it's like, I wish they hadn't explained that. But yeah, great work to put all this together and pull it all together from archive. Absolutely love it.
Yeah, I would have always referred back to Nettleton, but there's more in here This is a next stage on from Nettleton,
There's more minutiae.
and it broadens it out. It fascinated us who'd written articles. That unfortunately that seems to be lost in the mists of time. Who wrote these articles at the time? The industry was going through big changes at the time, but I'm fascinated also how you took things out of it that, as you say, buried in the details, where you speak about maturing the yeast, which speaks to that story of Hastie speaking about the yeast being delivered to Isla. And I thought that was interesting that you picked up on that and matured the yeast.
Yeah, it's something we'd already been doing on and off in order to replicate old style logistics trails of 1950s, 1960s spent brewer's yeast was going up to, say, some Islay distilleries, and that was coming all the way from north of England. It was taking a while to get there, and then it was taking a while to get used as well. Potentially being, probably not going into too much detail here, but potentially being dumped into one big vat that still had stuff from the previous there. Right, huge amount of biological contamination, and just really given I don't want to go into too much detail because I want to give people ideas here, because it's the resulting flavours are pretty fun. But
similar to what they're saying in the book about that was the way things had to be. A lot of the time, actually, when we have done the aging yeast, it's actually been because we don't have the space to store it as well. It has been through necessity as well, through the plant and the process, the restrictions we have. They almost I always kind of think that Dornoch has such a massive impact on the spirit itself, like the actual just inner workings of the distillery, day to day, almost more than what you were saying about heritage barley. It's not just heritage barley, brewer's yeast, slow distillations. It's the day-to-day running and how you have to manage those things.
Yeah, she's not an easy distillery to run.
No, by any stretch.
Yeah.
So what specifically did you do for the project?
So we were quite lucky in that our house variety for barley is Plumage Archer, organic floor malted Plumage Archer, so we had a ready source of that. That worked quite nicely as well because the book references Danish barley. Plumage barley would have been Danish, so there was quite a nice tie into Plumage Archer for us. On the mashing front, we upped our mash temperature slightly as best we could to match what was noted in the book. We don't have a sparge tank, we don't have a third water tank at Dornoch. We run a fly sparge, so we had to really up the temperature for that. That's something we've kept on through as well, because we noticed that we didn't see necessarily a drop in efficiency on the mashing front. The big one on the mashing front and wort production for us was cloudy worts. So we'd always been running, we've got a Vorlaf system, we can recircle worts, and we've got a custom built guillotine filter. We decided if we were committing to this, we were just going to go for it, and we were going to do totally cloudy worts. Realised pretty quickly that this would knacker our heat exchanger. We went from our usual draw off speed is about 6 to 6.5 seconds a litre, and we were up at like 10, 12. And me and Dan were having to, every other day, pull the heat exchanger apart, pressure wash it down, put it back together, which is a thankless task. Then fermentation, we were aging the yeast, and the big one was we did 4-week fermentation, accounted for roughly 25% of the total volume. Average fermentation time across the whole thing was just over 14 days, if I remember correctly, across the blend. So a blend of 4 week and 7 days.
Did it not end up just under 14 days by a few hours in the end?
Oh well, yeah, it was 13.75.
Because we had to bring in just a tiny bit, just to make up the numbers. We had to bring in a tiny bit more of 7 day into it, which just put us under the average.
Yeah, so that was the big one, the 4 week fermentation. Critically low yields.
I think we can still say 2 week average.
2 weeks,
close enough.
And
round up.
Super slow distillations, which is kind of standard, but there's a bit in the book where they refer to no bigger than a turkey's quill as the draw off. It's quite nice to have something objective to measure a distillation speed as describe it.
Pluck a turkey?
No, I didn't do the official measurement. But so that was it wasn't. Cut point speed by sense was the big thing for us as well. We've always done that to get that human interaction as well. So big thing was the cloudy worts, aging yeast, and the super long fermentation times as well. We won't be keeping the cloudy worts because stripping and cleaning heat exchangers isn't fun. Going for hazy now, I think, is the bare minimum.
Well, was that the longest ferment that you've run?
We've done a couple 3.5 weeks.
Yeah, I'd have to double check
Yeah,
on the
but
spreadsheets, but
it's definitely up there.
it's up there with the
definitely up
longest. There's been a few from equipment breaking, and then you're like, oh well, I guess it's long fermentation time, and then we close over the Christmas holidays. So depending how long we have over the Christmas holidays, we'll run. We'll just fill all the washbacks, leave the charger full, and then just walk away. So that's usually 3 and a bit weeks. It could be the longest we've done. Not sure until the next piece of equipment breaks and we have to wait for a part. But usually we can keep the whole show on the road one way or another. So hopefully, although we are
down at the moment. Yeah,
yeah,
I was
we've
wondering
just
if I
made
could say that.
Yeah, we've just made that decision today. So killed a condenser. Patch job didn't hold long enough. New one's ordered, and it's going to ship on Friday. So. I guess we'll be in the bottling hall for the next week or two.
Yeah, the 2-week fermentation Chevalier stuff coming out though, so that'll be nice when we get fixed.
I noticed you also mentioned how you cut the spirit slightly different. You don't have a set cut points.
Yeah, so every day, Simon and Phil are really great that they trust me and Dan and Jack, and obviously you guys in the distillery as well to make those cut points. It's a lot of faith. A lot of it comes from a frame of reference. I always kind of think the heads cut's quite an easy one to make because you are just cutting as soon as it's tasty spirit, and as soon as you get rid of that too headsy stuff, you and me make different heads cut points.
Yeah. I'm a little bit more aggressive on the front end, slow it right down, stratify between the fractions as much as you can in the pot still, and just squeeze out those layers allows you to go deeper and more accurate. I'm a bit more aggressive than Euan is on the heads cut, but I want Euan to use his best judgment because we're always changing variables at the front end, which affects the optimal cut point at the back end. So I don't want Euan thinking, what would Simon want? I want him to make the best judgment for that spirit on the day. And
we'd lose so much as well, I think, given, like you say, we changed the variables so much, we'd lose so much great potential for flavour if we were to keep the same rigid cut points every single time.
Takes a bit extra in the day because you slow the stills right down at the front end and the back end, and depending who's on production, everyone's got slightly different preferences, and we just let that happen. Yeah, we're not consistent. I like the inconsistency, and the type of spirit from what Euan cuts will make a better younger to middle-aged spirit, whereas I'm gunning for something that's going to go in a big refill barrel that's going to leave that 10, 15, 20 years. Yeah, and we're seeing that now with the spirit coming through, where the more conservative cut points at the younger age do present better at that time, but it's not quite got the same ability to go far into the future. So it's nice to have that spread in the warehouse. Again, small production. We don't have to worry about core products. We can have that variation, and that's and make a thing of it. Always having, but the variation is got human fingerprints, human DNA on it, human interaction. See, back then, everyone in the distillery's dramming. There's your feedback process.
No, that's right.
That's the frame of reference.
Yeah, Jimmy on the malt floor is going to tell you if your spirit's shite. Sort it out.
You've never quite told me that. You've never used those exact words.
Did you have an idea of what flavour you wanted, and then reversed it? With this, or did you have a kind of vague frame of reference and let it run?
Vague frame of reference. We're not precision surgeons on this. We're more like goat herders. I don't know, but you're not in total control, and you can't be in total control. You're influencing the flow and the direction, especially when we allow so much biological activity in our distillery as well, and play with so many variables. But that's where kind of the person in the stills is like the sweeper at the end to make the best out of what's come through.
When you have like that level of variability and you go into the old style production, there's so much that comes in that's out of your control that I think sort of the most you can do is kind of push it in the right direction. You can almost kind of nudge it, and then you have to trust that your elements will take hold and then making the cut points make sense helps us to get the best out of that.
Yeah, and if it's whiskey and it's not good at 8 years old, maybe it's going to be good at 15 years old, maybe it's going to be good at 20 years old. So, you know, you go through the warehouse and you make those judgments, and it's nice to have that variation. And it also, you know, we record everything, so when you do find something that's like a total surprise at 5 years old, you're like, ooh, that is the exact thing that this project is, like the very precise pinnacle of what we're gunning for. What did we do again? Can we do that again?
But then you quite often find out that sometimes the ones that we really like, the consistent flavour or the consistent kind of threads or stuff that we don't actually really have a level of control over. Like
there's things that happen anyway.
We've noticed a really good run recently from sort of 120 to sort of 140. Been really, really tasty.
Oh, in casks.
In casks, and a lot of stuff not fermented out. You know, that was fully in the washbacks, even after 10 days.
Right.
You know, and that's not something I think we'd ever be able to recreate. You wouldn't be able to plan for that effectively in sort of wooden washbacks, high level biological activity. That might be the secret. You never know, that could be the...
So do you think then in those days that there was this acceptance of variability and variation, that the distiller was always kind of thinking on their feet and using intuition to kind of get around potential issues?
You know, nowadays you can keep everything clean, and you can sanitize and remove the biological components that you don't have control over. And that didn't come until much later with more modern cleaning techniques. That really started in the 60s, but you know it came in at different places throughout the industry.
There's a paper from Allied Distillers in the 70s where it talks about removing lactobacillus to improve your yield, and that's, you know, like the strict clean regimes, and advocates for all this as like a cause of efficiency. That would have been the turning point almost, you know.
Yeah. That's the control, and you can feel really in control of your life if everything's precise and happening the same as it did yesterday. But we like to ride not the roller coaster because that's on tracks. But we you know, you need to leave room for nature, because there's so much biological complexity that comes in behind that affects the flavour. And with an engineered whiskey where everything's in control, there's some flavour spikes. You know, like, okay, whatever you're gunning for, you can potentially achieve. Okay, this one's really big on apple, or this has got kind of strawberry notes in this, and that's like dominant, and it's like everything else down. Whereas we like to build everything on a rich mat of biological complexity, so that there's 1,000 different flavours in there under the surface. But we're looking to peak on some notes, and we're trying to push for certain notes to peak out and above that, but it has to be built on this sort of rich layer of almost indescribable biological complexity, where almost every flavour is hidden in there if you were to just spend enough time with it. And then you need the texture, the mouthfeel, and the body to deliver that, and to act as the carrying mechanism to hold the finish, to hold it in your mouth. Just embrace the chaos. Not too much though.
So the 1927 experiment or trial, or that's not the right word, but the 1927 whiskey you made, how different is it from what you make at Dornoch normally?
Not much.
Not much.
Not much. Yeah. It's got that characteristic sort of mezcal vibe that we quite often get, green agave. I would have said it was maybe a slightly meatier, but that. That
depends what batch you're comparing against. So, you know, we've done some absolute meat monsters along the way. So.
What do you think the cloudy wort might have added?
I think
flavour-wise,
nailing exact cloudy worts, exactly what that does when we've got bringing the really long fermentation and the biological complexity. I think it's just giving more food for the wild yeast and the biological complexity you're going to get in there prior to sort of doing what was eventually released.
When you read stuff about this, you get like complete contradicting reports and academic reports on the effect of clear worts versus cloudy worts.
But when we did the 2-week fermentation stuff prior to just single batches, just to experiment with it, we did the cloudy worts, some of the most intensely fruity new make I think we've had. Now I think there's definitely, the long fermentation would definitely have been the driving factor behind that, but I do think that when you bring in the cloudy worts, you're talking about 2-week fermentation in what is quite a funky wee environment. There's definitely more fuel for the yeast and the bacteria in there to act upon. If you'd done clear worts, it might have fermented faster, it would have finished quicker, and then you'd have got more souring, acetic acid, but because we've been able to prolong it,
Yeah.
maybe.
Well,
Yeah.
we didn't because we didn't bring the new. We've got the underback we've got is actually designed to. It's a roundabout way of replicating the old style of. We've got semi-louter mash tuns. Semi-louter mash tuns have much bigger gaps on the false bottom because the mixing is horizontal. You can have these big gaps and a faster flow rate through. But the old full louter mash tuns had much finer gaps because when you're full loutering, mixing all the way through top to bottom, all the small particles get through and block it up. So you need a fine mesh. So we introduced a fine mesh in our underback, which is on a guillotine. So sketch something up. Friend who does some stainless fabrication put together. And so we can engage or disengage that, and that's to kind of replicate that finer mash bed. But also your cloudiness will be affected by your draw off time as well. Because I like to, we'll Vorlauf and with the guillotine up so everything passes underneath it, and then we'll drop it down at the end of the Vorlauf before we start drawing off. And that's because I don't like stripping and cleaning heat exchangers, quite frankly, because that stops any trub or particulate matter getting stuck in there. So then a backwash and a chemical clean's good enough. Whereas if you allow all that particulate matter to get through there, then you're stripping and cleaning it every few days to declog it, which is not fun. But yeah, you could shorter stand time, faster draw if you're looking to push for more cloudy worts.
We do quite a long stand time. I tend to be quite conservative in my mashing, just to because we work with barley that's got friability down to like 90-85% sometimes. Really need to make sure you get the most out of it because we spend a lot of money on stuff that's already very low yielding. We do need to make sure that we get the most out of our barley, so we do quite a long stand time, which will bring in the clearer worts naturally. The wort question, I think you could have a discussion for ages about it, to be honest. I don't think there's ever going to be an answer.
It's a funny one because when I remember we were having this chat when we were reading the book, going, does this make sense?
It does say that it's beneficial to fermentation, and that was why I wanted to try it, because I was sold it. Prior to this, we'd always pushed for, I was doing like a 40-minute recirc, 10 minutes without the screen, 30 minutes with the screen down, and then I saw this and I was like, well, actually, if these guys are saying it's beneficial, let's give it a go. Knackered the heat exchanger, completely, ruined my weekend cleaning that.
Yeah.
But
sorry, but our underback with the filter and stuff on it. How long? 4 years has that been in? 5 years.
It was during COVID.
2020.
2020, yeah. So
it's
three
been
and a half, 4 years, roughly.
Yeah. So it's all the production before that have gone through the old system.
Yeah. Yes. But you're still within the research on that. We were still. Yeah, that was.
Yeah. We're still doing a research. But
So this is a big tick of justification for your existing approach, but how do you think this could then be utilised by the industry as a whole?
No one is stupid enough as we are. So I know how much it costs to make Dornoch. I know the material costs are double, triple. The yield is significantly lower. You can't make this style of whiskey without running the kind of yield levels they achieved at the time. You could pick and choose some elements of it. So you could bring in an old barley variety and combine it. So I think you might see a little bit more of that, where people will be doing special runs where they're picking and choosing elements but not going the full hog, because the sacrifice is, well, it depends who you have to justify your decisions to. If you're in production and you've got to tell your accountant or your board or something, but and I think for a lot of distillery guys as well, they take a lot of pride in their performance figures as well, as well as how good their liquid tastes, but also in their plant performance figures. So I can see a lot of people picking and choosing elements occasionally, and you might see some of these guys where they found something where like, we might bring that in, and okay, but if you start thinking, if you're whatever a 500,000 OLA distillery, if you sacrifice 5% of yield, that number goes. That's a big chunk down. Of course, I would justify that in many different ways, but the true proof of the pudding doesn't come for 8, 10, 12, 15 years to see if that is a a viable strategy or not. So, and I think production is one of the places that does get squeezed when things tighten as well.
But then, those kind of constraints breed creativity, and hopefully there's enough evidence in here, there's enough things you can draw from here that, if one thing is squeezed, well, you've got a reference point where you go back and say, okay, how else do we bring in that point of differentiation, that complexity to make it, trying to think what word I'm trying to say, to create more complexity and to create differentiation in our spirit.
There's a few important elements that are easier wins with less sacrifice. So there's sweet spots, and Euan was with me up on running some experiments and collaborations elsewhere where we're bringing in elements of Dornoch style and combining it with the house style and trying to find sweet spots where the yield's a bit lower and the cost of production's a bit higher, but it's acceptably higher and the yield's acceptably lower, and the liquid quality is pretty damn good. So is it worth that X percentage increase in cost? Compounding, that's always the important part, is an increase in cost compounding with a decrease in yield. There's a fun one. And then with the current warehousing regulations, I'm still yet to see any numbers on how that affects maturation, but it won't be insignificant, and there's another compounding effect. So you've got all these compounding things happening in the way you don't want them compounding, the wrong direction. Obviously, I can see some people picking and choosing some elements, trying to find those sweet spots, and we've been doing that elsewhere because our new distillery we're building, it's a larger scale, and we'll go bankrupt if we try and make Dornoch on that scale. We're keeping Dornoch to do Dornoch things, and we're trying to find those sweet spots at the new site. And I think we've found some pretty good sweet spots where you're getting your most bang for your buck in terms of bringing in some old style elements, but we'll keep working on that. It'll be a fun experiment. It also lets us go and play with other people, which is great. We love that.
That's great. Well, I look forward to trying everything that you're going to be playing with in the future. Thanks for being part of this, guys.
Thanks. Thanks for having us up for it. So, I think it's time to go taste
Let's
this.
go try it.
Thanks a million. Good.